All right, welcome to another episode of the Legacy Builders podcast. I'm your host, Kyle McGee. Excited for today. Today's guest is Gavin Gallagher. Gavin is an executive director at Earlsfort Group, a family run real estate firm. He's responsible for all of the group's commercial real estate activities, in particular, their commercial development, East Point, an award winning office campus of 38 buildings totaling 1.5 million square feet located adjacent to the North Docklands in Dublin. While it's a busy hands-on role, he has made time for his personal interests as a writer, speaker, and coach. Gavin has been a property investor and developer for over 30 years now and has bought, sold, built, and managed real estate assets from Midtown Manhattan to downtown Dubai, 4 continents in total, including a short stint in West Africa. Today, along with running East Point, he owns the Elite Property Accelerator, a property investor training business which mentors investors, contractors, and professionals on how to build a property portfolio in a robust but sustainable way. Gavin, welcome to the show.
Delighted to be here, Kyle.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have quite the vast array of things going on, and you also have a very interesting story. So I'd love if you would start the conversation with giving the listener some context about, where you got started and where you're at today.
Well, where I got started was I studied architecture. So that was kind of my starting out. But what actually happened while I was in university is my father died in third year. And so he was an active businessman and an investor, and he went to Africa on business. It was a business trip. He was actually doing a project that he was speaking to the Hilton Group about. They wanted to have a hotel in one of the countries in Africa. And so he said, I'll go down and I'll have a look for you guys. And when he was there, he actually got sick. And as a result of that illness, he died. So I was 21 years of age. He was only 45. And it was obviously an extremely harrowing and kind of devastating moment for the family, because the main breadwinner was suddenly in hospital back here in Ireland for about 3 months, ill health getting worse and worse. And he died in November, about a month from Christmas. And so it was a pretty devastating time. And what was kind of typical back in those days, this happened in the 90s, in the early 90s. What was quite typical was that the husband would be the main breadwinner, and he wouldn't really discuss the business with anyone in the family. And so I was studying architecture. My mom was a happy housewife raising my younger brother and sister. And suddenly the main breadwinner is gone, and it's kind of roll up the sleeves and let's figure out like how this business works. And we suddenly realized that Dad, being in the property business, you tend to take out a lot of loans, and you leverage most of the deals that you're doing using bank debt. And he was no different. And so a month from Christmas, we realized that the family home was used as collateral in a deal. And it was a really scary a couple of years, because it was just hand-to-mouth existence, trying to kind of keep the ship afloat, because it was sinking fast. The income, Dad did not have life insurance policy in place. So income just went completely to a dead stop. And we had to do a fire sale of a number of assets just to kind of stay alive. So it was a real baptism of fire into business at a young age. And from there, I just kind of learned, the school of hard knocks, we say, and there was certainly a lot of hard knocks on that journey. And I rolled up my sleeves. I finished out my degree in architecture. I decided that I wanted to have the fallback of just having a degree, just in case, this business went completely belly up, which was quite a risk at the time. And what I managed to do was stabilize things. I worked with my mother at the time. She was very much sort of scared that I would use this as an excuse to leave university and just kind of roll up the sleeves. She didn't want that. So the two of us worked together, trying to stabilize things. And sure enough, we managed to kind of, after selling off a couple of assets, we kind of stabilized things enough that, it was, at least the family was out of danger. And after that point, I started to look at, okay, I've got to go and build my own business now. I've got to do my own thing. and I started my own small little architectural practice. And architecture, for those of you who know it, it's there's a lot of hard work involved in running a project, starting it from scratch and everything. And if you're an architect, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But the outside perception is that all those guys do all these great buildings and stuff. The reality is quite different. It's not the most glamorous job when when you have a small firm, because you spend most of your time chasing clients for fees, and you don't spend as much time designing these beautiful buildings as you thought you might. So in the middle of running my small firm, I was working for a small domestic extension on a house for a couple, and that was my project I was working on. And I was going to earn a total of 8,000 Irish pounds at the time, which is probably $10,000 more or less. And I can remember sort of thinking to myself, wow, this is a lot of work for $10,000. And at the same time, I found a small plot of land in on the west coast of Ireland, and I bought it for 25,000, and I got a permit on it to build some houses. And when I went to ask for some advice from a local property person, I said, do you know any builders that could help me build this out? And he came back and said, we have a builder that will just buy it from you. You've got the permits, he'll take it off your hands. And I didn't want that, because I kind of thought, well, I need to get experience. But then he said, well, he's going to pay you 125,000. And so 5x return. I suddenly realized, whoa, why am I practicing architecture when real estate is where it's at? And so I did this complete pivot straight into real estate at that point. And from there, it kind of grew like a snowball very quickly.
Yeah, so there's a lot to share there, and I'm sorry to hear about your father. I also lost my father at an early age, and what I've found, and I'm interested to hear if from you, what did losing your dad at such an early age, how did that change your perspective on time, life in general, just your whole worldview?
Well, my worldview certainly, I mean, absolutely changed overnight. And what was kind of interesting about it was that I never had any interest in fitness or health or anything like that. But when you watch a loved one dying of, at a young, in his prime, essentially, you suddenly become very health conscious and very aware. And so I started getting into working out, watching what I eat. Don't drink alcohol. I just basically got very, very clean in the way I live, and that was one of the first things. The other thing is that the best way to describe me, I was in university studying, and I was just like a young graduate, not even graduate, pre-graduate, and I'm just sort of enjoying life. And then suddenly, in the space of a couple of months, you go from somebody who hasn't a care in the world to suddenly survival. And your dad is gone. You're now responsible for a family that are, my sister was only 13 years of age, so it was very young. My mother was concerned that the family home had been used as collateral, so we had to stabilize that situation. And it's it goes from not a care in the world to really serious thoughts about, what am I doing here? Like, I really do not know anything, and I must hoover up as much information as fast as I can, because otherwise we're going to falter, and I'm going to be responsible for letting the family down. So that was a big realization, and I went from not a care in the world to being obsessed with business and obsessed with, how does it all work? Now, in fairness, I was completely green. I had no idea. And I started reading books, biographies. I started, you know, you need to hoover up as much information as possible. And I think that's most likely the inspiration or the motivation behind me becoming a business coach myself, because I can remember what it was like when you don't have any direction and you're kind of trying to figure it all out. And I didn't have a mentor, I didn't have anyone. And I figured it out as I went, and I made a lot of mistakes. And I suddenly realized now, okay, I have 30 years of experience. Let's see if I can help somebody else not make those mistakes. Let's give them a guide and a roadmap forward.
I certainly want to go deeper into what you're currently doing with your Elite Property Accelerator and your consulting or mentorship training business, but I want to stay in these early years. there was a quote that really helped me when my dad passed, and it was, it's not what happens to you that defines you, it's how you respond to what happens to you that defines your character. And that was something that I just maybe came across it at the perfect time and just stuck with it, and I was like, hey, I'm not going to let this define me. I'm going to be better because of it. And it sounds like you also, whether it was that quote or whatever it was, but a different level of responsibility is when you're the oldest sibling, and you're young, 21 when it happens, and your mom's not a business person or hasn't practiced business, and you have these responsibilities. I want to get your thoughts on when your back's against the wall, right? And you don't really have a choice, or you do have a choice, but you decided to lean in and really try to make the most of the situation. So, what helped develop your mindset through those things where you didn't know anything what you were doing, but you were thrown into this situation?
That's a great question, Kyle. Like, one of the things I found is, well, first of all, always be learning is a kind of philosophy that I believe. And even now today, I'm still looking for information to improve myself. I spend a lot of time, in fact, asking questions of ChatGPT just to kind of refine everything and create frameworks in my mind for stuff. But at the time, and I've gone through some pretty difficult times since that moment. Like, that was the first difficult moment that I had to kind of pull up the sleeves and figure out a way through. Resilience is something that I'm not sure everyone is born with. And so that is something that you really need to think about, is how strong are you mentally to deal with something like this? I have seen people just effectively give up because they kind of think that this is pointless. Like, I'm just fighting a losing battle here and there's no point in going on. And I never accepted that. But there was moments when it was pretty dark and you kind of think, God, will we ever get out of this? I think you have to dig deep and look for something inside that. I think I'm kind of blessed with a tough mental sort of makeup, I guess. Despite, very, very challenging moments, I have kind of worked through. I haven't let it get the most of me. And so I guess that's kind of the first thing. You really have to put things into perspective. You have to look at what is the point of all of this struggle and effort. If it's just about you, I don't think it's enough. But if you make it bigger than yourself, so in my case, I had my brother and sister and my mother as a kind of, okay, this is not just me who's in difficulty here. I have to help. I have to do whatever it takes to get them out of this. And so I think a certain amount of it is making the issue bigger than yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it's just you curling up in bed and like, oh, I don't want to see, I don't want to deal with today. It's easy to do that if it's just you because you're the only person who suffers. But if you widen that to include others, and then there's a couple of mental models you can use where it's the pain and the pleasure, where you say, okay, if I keep working at this, a point at the future will be, it's all sorted. The family will feel completely stabilized. You'll be able to look back at this as a success. The alternative to that is that your family are out in the streets, like literally they've lost the family home. And like looking at the two of them side by side, it really makes it very obvious that you are the gap between those two outcomes. And so you need to kind of pull up your sleeves and just do whatever it takes.
Yeah, I love that. And I've heard that being phrased as having a why that's greater
Yeah.
than you, right? Like having that
What's your
why,
why?
where what's your why, right? And that's a big deal. You said something that I want to push a little deeper on. You said that you're blessed with a tough mental makeup. Do you think you're blessed with a tough mental makeup, or do you think that that's something that you've had to really work diligently on and develop?
That is an interesting question, and the reason I say I was blessed with it is just because I have two family members that took their lives in the last 30 years,
Mm.
and it was very, very difficult. And I was close to both of them, and what happened in both cases was related to just lacking that mental toughness and going through a really difficult challenge, and just thinking, this is too much, I can't take it. And so the first one happened at a young age. My dad had already died, and his brother was, let me see, it was it was 6 years later. So I was about 27. And at the age of 27, we were on a bit of a holiday, not a holiday, but more of a kind of a business celebration where we flew to this hotel and we put up all of the people that were involved in this project that we worked on. And the project had been successful and we were kind of celebrating. And we had this great weekend where we all, drank lots of alcohol and had lots of fun and lots of games and, basically kind of a big party. And we flew back in the plane, and my uncle was the chairman of the business at the time. And we said goodbye. And then the next day, the police contacted me and say, we'd like to meet you. And I was like, what's this about? And they said, we'll tell you when we meet you. And so I went to this location, and the policeman showed me my uncle's passport and said, who is this? And I said, this is my uncle. Why? And he goes, I'm sorry to say he's dead. And I was like, oh my God, like what's happened? Was there a car accident? And he goes, no, he killed himself. And it was like, hold on, I was just with him yesterday. And that was the first moment when, shock, first of all. But second of all, the next thing the policeman said to me was, okay, Gavin, you need to come with us now, and we're going to visit his widow's house, and you're going to have to inform his widow that her husband has killed himself. And I was just like, hold on a second. What do you mean I have to do this? And he says, well, the police don't do it. We get a family member to do it. And I was like, hold on, I'm only 27. And it's like, it's time to man up, basically. And so went to the house, and literally, to see the impact of that decision that he made. And his children were all young. Like the eldest was 14, and it went down as low as 4 years of age. And I saw all of this as visceral, like right in your face, and seeing her reaction and seeing, the kids and everything. And just, I was in complete stunned myself, but to see what happens after that. And I just remember thinking, no matter what I ever go through, I could never put my family through such an experience. And I kind of was very angry with my uncle, because I kind of thought, like, you chicken shit, like, how can you have done this? Like, your kids are little kids. Like, I mean, whatever you're going through, surely you can man up for those kids, So it was a very, very difficult time, but it really challenged my view on mental strength. And I think possibly that was the first moment when I kind of realized, no matter what I'm going through, I'm going to survive, and I'm going to kind of fight my way out of this. And basically, I did go through very, very dark and difficult moments over the coming years. And sometimes I related back to that moment, and I can remember thinking, that's not happening to me.
Golly, that is a powerful, powerful story. And it just goes to show, like, you don't know what people go through. Like, you don't know what's going on in their head, like
Yeah.
what issues they're dealing with. I've got to ask, and Gavin, I don't know you well. This is our first conversation for anyone listening, but I've got to ask. It's something that I talk about a lot. And so if you feel comfortable enough talking about it, what role did your faith play in those times? Like, because oftentimes, when we're going through these really difficult struggles, you either lean away, and say, like, you don't understand, like, what is God doing here, or you lean in, right? And from seeing what you've done with your life, I'm sure there's been ups and downs in that, but did faith play any role in helping you get through this?
I would say it played less of a role as much as mental strength. Like, when I can remember when my dad was very, very ill, and the doctors were telling us, like, he has a couple of days left. And I can remember praying to God and saying, like, please, please, please let him, get through this. And then when he died, you kind of feel like, well, what was the point of all that, And so,
Mhm.
but then at the other side of it, you kind of say, well, I did get them, like, it did alter the course of my life. It made me a stronger person and stuff. And so, did God have a part in that? So you could argue both sides, but there are times, like, what you've also got to understand is, at the time this happened, the Catholic Church in Ireland was going through a lot of negative press because of various things that had happened in the past and stuff. And so there was a little bit of a rejection of the church at the time. And so that would filter into some of the thoughts. But anytime, it's funny, I get into an airplane and just as we're about to take off, I find myself, doing the sign of the cross, because you kind of think, well, I just want to be protected if there's something involved in that, so I wouldn't say I've completely abandoned my faith, but at the same time, I'm not a regular churchgoer.
Yeah,
So I think it's kind of up in the head, a lot of the thing. And it depends really on your own personal view,
sure.
on how God impacts that.
Yeah, well, certainly, and that's some very significant life change, like some deep hardy stuff, like at a young impressionable age, right? 21, then you're 27, and so talk me through the next phase of your career, because we haven't even gotten to half of it, right? Like
That's
you're
building it up for something for the big. So what happened after my uncle died? What I had to step into the business role that he had occupied, and so I didn't take the chairman's role because I was too young, and there was some other relatives that were stepped into that more mature kind of role. But I got involved in the business, in the family business, and that was something that I had always said to my dad, and my dad had always said, like, don't go into the family business, build something of your own. So I was very much in two minds. I was saying I have to help stabilize my mother and my brother and sister's finances. So I'm going to go into the family business for that reason. But being true to dad's preference, I'm not going to rely on that exclusively. So that's why I started my architectural practice and then got into the property side of things. And what happened was I kind of ran the two side by side. But when I made that 5x return on that first deal, what actually happened is I kind of repeated that process on another couple of deals, and I got exceptionally good at it, and I got very lucky in a lot of cases. And in one deal that I did, I can remember I invested 600,000 in a property, and I borrowed, we'll say, 550,000, and I put it in 50 of my own. Within a year and a half, I sold that investment for 3.7 million.
mm,
And so an enormous profit, like in just 1.5 years. And I can remember thinking to myself, whoa, like I have figured out the secret formula to becoming a multi-millionaire. And so that was the first step. And then remarkably, I did it again shortly afterwards. Like within about 6 months, I had done it again and I had made a similar amount of money. And so one of the positive things of that is like, whoa, it suddenly was a paradigm shift in my mindset. It was like, I'm not a struggling architect anymore. I'm actually like, I figured out how to become like a property mogul, so to speak. And the problem is I did not have a mentor. I did not have anyone in my corner saying, whoa, Gavin, like you're doing incredibly well, but like it's not always going to go this easily. And so naturally enough, somebody who's doing really well at a young age, it can go to the head. And that is what happened. So all of a sudden, new car, traveling first class. I bought a villa in the south of Spain. I bought an apartment in New York City. I did another deal and I made 4 million on that deal. And so, in the space of 3 or 4 years, I had made at least 10 million cash. And I can remember thinking to myself, man, why would I put off a lifestyle that I can have right now? And so I started really living this lavish lifestyle. And I think in retrospect now, I know how foolish that was. But when you've seen, when you put money into a deal, when you put 50,000 into a deal and you turn that into 3 million, and then you do something similar again and again, you kind of think, man, I can do no wrong here. So the big mistake I made was thinking that I can export that to another country. And I got it into my mind that I wanted to be an international business person. The lessons that I had learned in making those really good deals, I sort of thought, okay, if I just do that on a much bigger scale, the profits will be 10x that. And I went down to the south of Spain and I found this investment, and it was a 40 million in initial investment. And I thought to myself, I'm going to put in 3 million of my own money, and I'm going to borrow 30 million, and I'm going to raise money from some investors. And between the whole lot, we'll end up selling this thing in a couple of years for about 120 million. And I was on course to make probably about a 20 million investment off of the 3 million. And this was my vision. And this is what I thought, like, this is going to put me on the map as a super successful property guy. Now, I already was, but I didn't see it that way. I kind of kept on thinking I could be bigger and bigger. And I closed on that Spanish deal in July 2008. So you can do the maths. Like, it didn't take long for the Lehman Brothers collapse to come along, and everything just turned completely upside down. And within a year, all of the tenants that I had agreed to kind of come in and rent the place and stuff, they'd all pulled out of the deal. And I had this huge property deal that was just going to be an absolute anchor. It was going to sink the entire portfolio. So I rolled up my sleeves. I moved to Spain. I tried to kind of rescue it. Then I started traveling to the Middle East because I wanted to get money from the likes of Saudi Arabia or Dubai or a place like that. I thought I could bring guys like that in to actually rescue the deal. And it was just a hopeless thing. And so I went from having a net worth, my portfolio at the age of 35 was 65 million. That was the value of all of the assets and stuff. And 3 years later, in 2011, I did a bank statement to meet with the bank, a net worth statement. And my net worth was minus 16 million. And it was just this moment of like realization that, oh, wow, I am in such deep shit, really. I mean, can I ever get out of this? And it was a really humbling moment, because 3 years before, I'd change my car whenever I feel like it. I mean, there wasn't any thought to that kind of expenditure. And suddenly the bank had frozen all my bank accounts. I had zero income coming in. And my family home that I had, which was a beautiful 6-bedroom mansion that my wife was very proud of, the bank seized that and they put it on the market and they sold it. And they sold it at 20% of what we had paid for it. So the whole thing was just a complete disaster. This led to my wife and I separating and divorcing. And this led to my bank account just going like into the zeros. And I had to go and ask my brother to bail me out. I had to ask if he could allow me to live rent-free in one of his rental properties, because I didn't even have the money to pay rent. And it was extraordinarily humbling. It was one of those moments that I mentioned earlier where I realized I'm in a dark tunnel, but I saw what these dark tunnels can do to some people, and I'm not going to let that happen to me. And so I kind of just bit the bullet. The first thing that I did was accept that I was to blame. And the big issue that a lot of people, I could see this happening, and it happened to me too, is that after 2008, when the banks were suddenly scrambling and they were like closing things down and all this, I was blaming everybody but the bank, but myself. I was saying, like, the bank they're so premature to close this loan down. Like, I could have easily got us out of this. And it was all about them, not me. And then about 2 years into it, when I saw that I was worth 16 million negative, I suddenly went, you know what? Stop bullshitting yourself. This is you. You got yourself into this. You're the one who signed all those loan agreements. The banks didn't like force it down your throat. And the only way you're going to get yourself out of this is if you just own up to that and stop acting the victim and start putting the warrior kind of ethos back into your life. So that was the point. That was actually, as a complete sideline, that was when fitness became so important to me, because one thing, when you have financial success, and I think it's particularly the case with men, when you have huge financial success, you kind of wrap your identity up in it. It's like what you're driving, it's the watch you're wearing, it's all of this, the lifestyle that you present to people. And if you take that away from somebody, they can feel like a complete failure, and it can be very, very difficult to accept that your identity is gone. And so I decided, okay, what cannot be taken away from me? I can become the fittest guy that I know. And I started getting into triathlon and adventure racing and all this kind of stuff. And I just became really, really tough physically and mentally. And the endorphins released by exercise actually helped a lot with just the stress, because the stress was really, really high.
So that, again, what an awesome story, really, and one of a lot of failure but bounce back. And we talk about this in a 40-minute conversation, right? And so, like, it's easy for someone to be listening to not maybe fully grasp how difficult it is to pull yourself out of those doom loops, right? So you've had
Big
this
time.
massive success, you're living this great lifestyle. Next thing you know, foreclosure, divorce, like just pain after pain, to go and asking your brother to live rent free in an apartment complex, or whatever it might have been. So I heard extreme ownership, right? Like, you
Yes.
finally said, "Hey, it's me. Like, I'm not blaming anybody. I'm not blaming anything. Like, it's me." What got you to that point? Because you said it was just like, I decided that I was gonna own it. Was there people, or was there books, or was there key relationships? What specifically helped pull yourself out of that?
I think probably there was a certain amount of personal development. Like at the time, I think I discovered Tony Robbins. And Tony Robbins, there's a lot of people that will say, oh, come on, like, all the jumping up and down and stuff like that. But I found it to be incredibly valuable in that moment. And I can remember he has this thing, they call it what is it? The Dickens formula or something like that. And that's where you look at your life in the past, you look at your life in the present, and you look at your life in the future. And you have to kind of project into the future. What would your life look like if you continue going down this doom path versus if you turn it around and if you go in the right direction? And I can remember seeing this pathway to, this old guy, overweight, sitting in an apartment in his underwear, eating, nachos or something like that. That's one. And, divorced, all of his kids, like, have left and decided, like, he's no inspiration for me. And then the alternative to that was to become this really inspiring, strong person who rebuilt from scratch. And you kind of think, okay, and how do you do that? Well, it starts with extreme ownership. Obviously, Jocko Willink hadn't written that book at that stage, but it was very much the kind of ethos that I figured that was necessary in that moment. It's like, I can't play the victim any longer. I've got to sort of roll up my sleeves and just say, do you know what? There's a few things. First of all, and this is kind of my resilience, the steps to kind of recovering from something bad like that. There's a few steps that I believe. Number one is to put things into perspective. And I kind of thought to myself, yes, I've lost a fortune. Yes, I've put myself into this ridiculous situation that could have been avoided if I'd been a little bit more disciplined. But in perspective, has anybody died? Like I saw what happened to my uncle after that. Is it a situation like that? No, it's not. I've had a financial setback. I have not, nobody's died. Nobody's sick. Nobody is in in a kind of terminal illness. And so, first of all, let's put it into perspective. It's just a financial setback. That was the first thing. The second thing then was, have a look at what resources you have to hand. So a lot of people, I think they look at their financial situation as the only resource available. And it's like, I have no money, I can do nothing. But that's not true. Like, the reality is I have tons of experience. You can't take that away from me. I still have the experience. I still have the knowledge. And then I had this great network of contacts on my telephone. So I kind of thought, you know what, take the money away from it. I have got a lot of resources there that I can lean on. And so that was kind of the way I looked at it, is this is, going to be, I'm going to try and build something with 3 of the 4 strands. And I think I can do that. It might be a little slower, but it will still have the same kind of long-term outcome that I'm hoping for. And that's where I kind of came from at it.
Yeah, it's super powerful. It's, one of those things that perspective is a superpower, right? And those that tend to not pick themselves up, they're probably not listening to this podcast. They don't
Yeah.
seek out these kind of things and different perspectives to look at the other side of the picture, right? And then your resources. I meant like your life experience, your knowledge. That's something that no one can ever take away from you if you apply it, right? So great 2 points. I'd like to hear the next phase. So you experienced this downfall. You decided you're going to pick yourself up. What led from that 2012 to today, and what did that look like?
Well, I went abroad for a couple of years. I spent some time on the road. And so I spent a couple of years in the Middle East. And in that period of time, I was working with some other people. And they had figured out this interesting formula where we actually built a headquarter building for a major bank. And so that was a bit of a comeback. It also gave me some indication of how to do this. So you don't need to do speculative development. It is possible to pre-agree with a big tenant and then work backwards from that. So you have, instead of looking for the land and then after you've got the land and after you've built the building looking for the tenant, you start with the tenant and you say, okay, let's secure the tenant first. Let's tell them what we're going to build them and let them get on board with that. And then they agreed in advance to lease the building once it was in place. So we actually had a document that was worth a lot of money. All we had to do now was find the land and build the building to their specifications. So once we did that, that sort of got me back on the path to reliving some success. At the time when I was abroad, Ireland was in a really, really difficult place. The country had suffered some severe downturn in terms of property values. Some places had fallen 60 to 70%. So there was huge value available. And so when I returned to Ireland after about 5 years abroad, there was deep value to be found. And so I started looking at a lot of different opportunities. There was student accommodation was a really interesting opportunity at the time. There was opportunities to double your money and triple your money. But the biggest thing was having the realization that when you've been through really difficult times, when you failed at the level that I failed, as much as I thought that was a major, stumbling block to me going forward at all, the reality is people are actually see that as a huge benefit. If you're able to say, hey, listen, this is what happened to me, people find that impressive. Like, of course, you wish it didn't happen to you, but people are more impressed by the fact that you went through that and that you're out the other side and that you've got all of the lessons from that. So it makes for a very convincing discussion if you're meeting with investors and if you're speaking to, we'll say seasoned investors who know what they're talking about, and you're saying, listen, this is what I want to do, and they know that you've gone through what you've gone through, that's a lot more persuasive than some young guy who's kind of like, oh, this is what I want to build, and you've never experienced any downturn, because those guys will think that you're a little bit wet behind the ears and that you haven't really been to your first rodeo yet, to use that old saying. So I think that was a big realization that as much as I suffered and the pain of it all and the difficulty that I went through, it's actually a superpower in many respects, and it actually stands to you going forward. So I started doing those kind of deals where you actually brought in investor finance and you started building things back up from there.
Yeah, there's something about real world experience and resilience built through that. So for sure. East Point, which is 38 buildings, 1.5 million square feet.
That's a major development. So when I was building up my own little sort of portfolio initially, I started getting involved in that. What we did was we bought a big block of land from the local municipality, and what it had been is at a landfill site. So it had been a place there where the local municipality just dumped everything. So there was, old kids' nappies and old beds and rubbish sacks and everything. And they built this. This had been built up over 25 years. And then they covered it in topsoil, and they basically sold it as 40 acres of land that needed to be, completely. You've got to do a lot of work to a site like that. So we had to go and put in all sorts of resources and infrastructure in order to remove the methane gases and things like that. There's a lot of stuff that comes from. We weren't allowed to build residential on it because you can't build residential in that kind of a site. So what we decided to do was to go and build commercial offices. And to use that example that I said earlier, when you you have the land and you're building, we managed to get the site designated, which was a tax benefit that allowed any investor who bought into that land would actually have double tax relief, and so they wouldn't pay any tax on the income from the buildings. So that made it very attractive. And so we would put a tenant in place, and then we would immediately have these tax partnerships that were buying them. What was interesting was all these tax partnerships, they bought it up. As soon as we put it on the market, it was instantly sold. So it was very successful. But then in 2010, a lot of those tax partnerships folded, and we ended up buying back a lot of our buildings at less than construction value. And so it was an interesting way, and it was a good way to kind of notice the way the cycle works, is that there's times when everyone is looking to get in, and there's times when everyone is looking to get out. And so timing in real estate is a massive thing.
Yeah. And it's so counterintuitive, right? Like now is a very difficult time. Interest rates are high. Insurance is difficult. There's so much uncertainty in the world globally, talking with you from
Yes.
Ireland, Middle East, China, all of these things. Now's the time probably to be buying. Who knows? No one has the crystal ball, but it's like the old Warren Buffett, when everyone's out is the time to go in.
I would say, like what I said, because I had a conversation with the members of my mastermind last night, and we were talking about this exact topic, and we were saying that, you know what, one of them was saying, maybe there's so much uncertainty, now is not the time to buy. And I said, you may be right. I said, but you should never take your eye off the market. I said, the thing is what people do is they say, there's going to be a crash, and maybe there will be. Who knows? There could be this big toppling, with America's debt crisis and all that kind of stuff. You just don't know what's around the corner. But if that were to happen, there's going to be a huge amount of bargains, but you're not going to know it unless you're constantly watching the market. So right. I say to my guys, yes, don't feel like you've got money burning a hole in your pocket. Don't feel like you have to invest. Just sit there and look for value. And if you find value, that's fine. Start looking to buy it. But I think there could be a downturn, and what you want to make sure is that you've got plenty of income and plenty of capital sitting there ready to deploy when that happens.
Yeah. I talk to a lot of different people, and specifically in real estate, that's what I do. And in any market, there's deals to be had, right? In the most aggressive, quote unquote seller's market, there's great buys out there because people are dying. There's divorce, there's inheritance, there's always a deal to be had sales in any market, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But you have to be active, and you have to be constantly looking in the game. One of my big things, and since I've been a little kid, I've never been, when it was a sports, I was never on the sidelines. Like I hated being on the sidelines, right? You have to be in the game, right? At all times, no matter. And if you get caught with your pants down, like you have to stay committed and be in there and figure it out, right? So I want to wrap this up, and the show's called Legacy Builders, and so I always like to ask the question, Gavin, when it's all said and done, you've come to the end of your life. What do you hope your legacy is?
Okay, so I think the way I would look at this is a couple of different strands to it. First of all, when my dad was dying, he said this. He said to me, he looked at me and said, like, make me proud. And that was something that really hit me hard. And I still reflect on that more than 30 years on now since he died. And so I'm always trying to do something that I feel would have made him proud. The second thing is I have 5 kids. And so I want to be an inspiration for them. I want to make them proud. And then the third thing that I want to do is I want to help people that have gone through that, first of all, want to get into real estate, but second of all, people who are in real estate that want to scale up but don't want to make the mistakes that I made. I want to be a guide to them and to sort of steer them in the right direction. It is easy to lose your discipline when you get a little bit of success, things going your way. And that is, as much as it's great when you're going through it, you've got to be so careful. And I think having a mentor or somebody that in your corner that can just tap you on the shoulder. Now, it's got to be someone that you'll respect, because if somebody who's never achieved what you're trying to achieve is giving you advice, you're not going to listen. But if you've got somebody who has achieved, impressive things financially or success or whatever, you'll listen to that person. And so it's trying to find that person who's going to give you the tap on the shoulder and say, this is stupid. Don't do this. You're not invincible. Things will turn. The market is cyclical. Get ready for a fall. And I think I look back and I think I didn't have that. I'm trying to be that now for others.
Well, I can tell you firsthand, you're definitely living out that legacy, because as you were sharing your stories, I'm 10 years into my career and I still think I'm in the very first inning, first chapter. I got in business in 2015. So it's been nothing but really up until the past couple of years. And so, I listen to your story and it's like, man, I believe God put us in here to have this conversation for a reason, and I want to learn and take the principles that, guys like you teach and talk about, to know that there will be challenge, right? And you have to set yourself up for it and be wise along the way. So thank you for that.
Not at all, Kyle. My pleasure.
Um, last couple questions. I'm a huge believer in books. I think that there's so much wisdom, and whether it's biographies, autobiographies, leadership books, self-discipline, all the things. If you could only refer one book to like a young, aspiring, or any age entrepreneur, what would it be?
Well, I would say there is a book. I'm looking at my library of books here, and there's one that really stands out, and it's there's a guy that wrote it who's probably quite well known in certain circles. His name is Daniel Priestley, and Daniel Priestley wrote a book called Key Person of Influence, and I read that book about 5 years ago, and when I read it, I remember kind of going, "Whoa, this is powerful," and it's all about putting yourself out there as a person of influence and sharing your knowledge, your thoughts, your insights, and putting it out there. So it was him who I actually met with Daniel. I joined an accelerator that he was running at the time, and I joined him, and he taught me create compelling either podcasts or blog posts or whatever it is, videos. And so I started to do that, and I've built up this following now. And it's funny, initially, nobody's listening, but then over time it kind of gathers momentum and stuff. And he has just this great framework for how to go about doing that, and how to turn yourself from just another guy that does what everyone else is doing to being somebody that kind of stands out in the crowd. And that's one of the reasons why I choose that book. So it's called The Key Person of Influence.
Yeah, I'm gonna pick up a copy. Haven't heard of it or him, and it just goes to show, like there's different circles, and there's different. So much. This world is so big, right? And we're
Yeah.
just these small little specks, but you could still make a difference if you choose to. Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I think that people listening will get some value from it. Gavin, if people want to reach out to you, how can they get a hold of you? Where can they find you?
The best thing to do is, well, I'm on Instagram, Gavin J Gallagher. I'm on TikTok, Gavin J Gallagher. I'm on LinkedIn, Gavin J Gallagher. The J is for James, and I go by it everywhere, because if you look it up without the J, there's about 200 Gavin Gallaghers out there. So.
Okay, great. Well, yeah, we'll put a link to the show, put a link to all his socials and his website in the show notes. And Gavin, again, thanks for coming on.
Not at all, Kyle. It's been a huge pleasure.
Great. Well, thank you all for listening, and we'll catch you next time.